Very good morning to you. It's Jonathan Count with you for a busy Friday morning here on BBC Radio York with the situation on the A1M. We'll keep you fully posted on that and let you know when things start to move there. But to the main matter in hand this morning, Dave Jones has been Chief Constable of North Yorkshire since June of 2013. Before that, he'd worked in Greater Manchester and in Northern Ireland. In 2017, he was awarded the Queen's Police Medal for his distinguished service to the force. Mr Jones is the National Police Chiefs Council Leader for Citizens in Policing, where he helps to develop stronger links between communities and the police through volunteering. He also happens to be the national lead for rural and wildlife crime, as if he wasn't busy enough. These days, he's responsible for the force here in North Yorkshire, a team, if you include the civilians and all the volunteers and everybody who's involved, about 3,000 people. Like all chief constables, he's got plenty of issues on his plate. Policing the roads of the county, dealing with antisocial behaviour, rural crime, you name it. The list must seem endless, certainly to him. He's giving us an hour of his time this morning to take your questions and hear your feedback about how well or otherwise you think he and his force are doing their job. As always, I've got questions I want to put to the Chief Constable this morning, but as always, your questions will be better. So the phone lines are open right now on 01904 641 641. You can text your question or your point to 81333, starting your message with the word York, or you can email jonathan@bbc.co.uk. Chief Constable Dave Jones, good morning and welcome to BBC Radio York again.
Good morning, thank you for the invite again.
We last spoke in March.
Right.
Things have hotted up in the county since then. You're obviously facing quite a situation at Kirby Misperton at the moment. Operation Kingfisher, with the protest about the fracking. What's your assessment initially of how it's going?
Well, we've obviously been planning for this for quite a while. So obviously one of the things we're very keen to do is obviously to minimise any disruption to the local community. So we can balance the needs for people to peacefully protest and at the same time allow people to get on with their lives, and also for the commercial enterprise to be able to carry on with its business as well. So, this is one of those classics for policing, isn't it, where we are there to ensure that everybody's rights are respected and that we're in a position to make sure that people have the opportunity to peacefully protest whilst making sure that this has minimum disruption to the local community.
It's one heck of a job, isn't it? I mean, you're caught between a rock and a hard place in several different directions, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think this is where we rely on the professionalism of the people that I've been heavily involved with, who've been planning for this for such a time, working closely with the local community. We have protest liaison officers who directly talk to the protesters, making sure that we balance that sort of ability for people to peacefully protest. And then obviously if there's occasions when that steps over the line, there's an expectation that the police service needs to do what it needs to do, which is keep that level of disruption to a reasonable level. And we have that conversation all the time around what's the importance of reasonableness for all parties, and at the same time the ultimate responsibility of keeping everybody safe.
Are you making the rules sort of almost on the hoof as you go?
No, I mean, there's decades of case law in relation to the police's responsibility in relation to protest, and at the same time, quite rightly, local taxpayers, local companies, local farmers would expect us to try and minimise that disruption. So we've had this in planning for quite a while, and from past experiences, this is one of the more difficult situations we place our police officers in. But I'm reassured by my daily briefings on this that we are trying to act in a proportionate and justified way, which gives people the opportunity to go about their lives whilst at the same time facilitating peaceful protests.
I had an email, as I suspect a lot of the local media did yesterday, from the fracking protest group yesterday, claiming that the senior officer in charge at Kirby Misperton, Superintendent Dave Hannon, has banned people from peaceful protest, and that the move is in direct contravention of protesters' human rights, a breach of various conventions that guarantee people the right to protest.
I think one of the things that we have to do is to make sure that we're in a position that we can justify our actions, that those actions are proportionate within the law and do facilitate peaceful protest. It is a key cornerstone of our democracy. So, I refute that kind of position has been taken by the organisation. We are there to facilitate peaceful protest. But at the same time, we have to allow people to go about their lives, carry out their commercial business.
But I mean, how do you respond to that there are, conventions, established international rules and regulations about what citizens have got the right to do, even if it involves disrupting other people's lives, that you're okay to go ahead and protest, even if that's what happens?
Yeah, I mean, there is case law. I mean, the European Convention on Human Rights gives people the right to protest. It also gives the right for people to carry out their sort of Article 8, which is about the right to private life. This is an experience I had for 5 years in Northern Ireland, which is one of the most complex and difficult of areas to police. And we are there in a position to try and help people each achieve their rights, but they are conflicting rights sometimes. You're going to have people who want to protest. They'll want to protest all day, all night. They'll probably want to block. They'll probably want to do things which actually then will completely disrupt and will be disproportionate on the impact of other people's. The one article that is absolutely the number one that we adhere to is Article 2, which is about the right to life. So we know there are occasions where people's safety may be at risk, and we will take action to ensure that everybody's kept safe, be they protesters or people coming into the site or a local community. And especially our own officers who also are facing a difficult situation.
Questions as well about whether or not your use of the practice of kettling is acceptable, this business of sort of effectively corralling protesters into a very small area.
Well, kettling's an emotional term that was linked to an event in Metropolitan Police. What we're trying to do is provide a tactical response to the situation that we face. We have large vehicles moving in and out of the site. There are people there that we need to make sure are being kept safe. So we talk to the various people there and have a conversation about everybody's safety and what's a reasonable approach to take. And I think if people go beyond that reasonable approach, then we have to uphold the law, and we will take the necessary action. The
voice you're hearing is that of Dave Jones. He's the Chief Constable of North Yorkshire. He's here to hear from you this morning. So if you have criticism of the actions of the protesters and you want to back up the way the police are handling the situation, maybe you're a local person who's fed up of it, it would be good to hear from you. If you're involved in the protest and you want to talk to him about how the police are handling the protest at the moment, then you're welcome to ring. It's 01904 641 641. One question that people are asking with a degree of irony is, where has Dave Jones suddenly got all these police officers from? People say, we've not seen a police officer round here for months and months and months, a bit like buses, but suddenly you can call up 60 or more on demand when you are there, in many people's view, protecting a commercial company and allowing them to start fracking. It's puzzling and even infuriating to some people. Where's all this manpower come from?
The resources that we use at the site are sort of commensurate with what we're facing at the time. So currently there are three members of staff. We scale up when we need to, and we can call on other resources. At the same time that we're actually policing the site there, business as usual is continuing. We have another senior officer who constantly monitors on a daily basis the impact that any of our resources being used at the site is having across the piece. I think I can see why we used to have this around football matches, wasn't it? Where did the police officers get all these, where did they all come from on a Saturday? We have means of bringing people on their rest day, and we minimise the impact on daily business. And I think that one of the things that the police service itself is having to manage is the constant increasing demand that we're facing and how we respond to it. We've been planning to try and minimise the number of police officers that we would have to deploy to the site, but clearly that depends on what's actually happening and our ability to respond as and when.
Forgive me, I obviously misheard you there. You said you had 3 members of staff on site, but I mean the pictures quite clearly show there are a lot more police officers on site than that.
On occasion, when we have to, we will scale up to 60 or 70 police officers. Other times there could only be a couple, if not sometimes one. It just depends on the activity on the day. Clearly, we have the ability to draw down resources as and when, and we have tactical plans in order to do that.
So are you drawing them in from other parts of North Yorkshire where they were on duty, or are you taking people off their rest days?
We have people who are deployed on a regular basis, public order units, as you will, which are already planned for and actually they are there and they will get a rest day back in the future at some point.
This must be playing havoc with your scheduling and your rotas, your rosters.
Well, I wouldn't agree. I think this has been in the planning for a while, and I know the Gold Commander has been doing her utmost to make sure that this has a minimum impact on service delivery. We're monitoring that on a daily basis. At the moment, it isn't having an impact on how we're providing a service to the public because we've put those contingencies in place.
There are accusations, and I'm sure you've seen these, and I'm sure you're used to dealing with them. I mean, the words that I've seen associated with policing at Kirkby Misperton, and I've just picked out a few of the more contentious ones: shambolic, brutal. I saw one tweet from a leading protester yesterday who alleged that a protester had been injured as a result of the actions of, and I'll quote here, a thug masquerading as a North Yorkshire police officer. I'm absolutely certain that's not how you view the activities of your officers deployed on the line, but that is what people, admittedly people who are in a very confrontational situation with you at the moment, but that is how they are choosing to describe the actions of some of your officers.
Well, I mean, I would refute that language that's being used there. We've adopted a neighbourhood policing style. We are talking to people. I think people who have watched the news recently will see that it's a measured, proportionate response by police officers who are professionally trained to deal with such incidents. I'm too long in the tooth to, be surprised by the kind of language that happens in these sorts of circumstances, but I would suggest that people look at the pictures, quite rightly. If there are issues of concern, we would, encourage people to come forward. We'll look at the details that they're suggesting, and we'll make sure that it's properly looked at either by ourselves or the Independent Police Complaints Commission.
But let's just listen to this. A woman was injured yesterday near Third Energy's fracking site in Ryedale. Dr. Steve Pears is one of the protesters.
I've been filming along the road. Obviously, there's been trucks coming out of the site. A number of people have been up closer to the village as the trucks have come out. One of those people was Vanda, who's been run at by one police officer. She can't move. She's getting severe pain from the spinal injuries that occurred before.
Your response to that accusation, the inference there that this woman was particularly injured as a result of the actions of a police officer yesterday?
Well, I'm not going to get, and you wouldn't expect me to get into the specific details, and clearly we would want to investigate that allegation. In a broader sense, there are various issues of concern for me around how people will want to portray what's happening at Kirkby Misperton. My view would be that needs to be seen in the cold light of day with the CCTV that's available, and I'm reassured by what I'm being told that the distinct professionalism of the officers at the scene, some of whom have been assaulted, to try and make sure that everybody remains safe, and that's what our primary objective is going to be. But if there are any concerns, clearly we'd look at it. But the people that are from North Yorkshire Police who are at Kirkby Misperton are the same officers that are dealing with members of the public in North Yorkshire on a daily basis, and I'm not sure suddenly this is going to turn them into the kind of individuals that they're suggesting. These are the same officers going around looking after your children, making sure that you're safe in your home, and I would be very surprised if what's being described there is the reality.
There are, of course, some local people taking part in this protest. They are there. We saw them on the television last night. They are local. They've not come in from anywhere else. Quite clearly, you as Chief Constable of this county want to maintain the sort of good and excellent relations and atmosphere of trust with those local people, with the entire community. You certainly don't want to get into this situation like the one that existed after the miners' strike, where I think there are still communities in South Yorkshire who have no trust and respect for the police. Do you think you're achieving that?
Well, we've put a lot of effort into reaching out to the local community. The senior officer at the scene has obviously been to public meetings as well. We have our own local community officers. We've been reaching out to the local farmers, making sure they understand what's happening, the police approach to it, trying to minimise disruption. And, there is no necessarily a kind of cohesiveness around in the local community as well around whether or not before they're either in favour of or not the activity taking place in Kirkby Misperton. I think the issue for us is to constantly reassure people that we will do our best to try and minimise any disruption for them, making sure they can go about their daily lives and balancing that against, the rights of everybody concerned.
Well, here's an email from a fellow David who says to you, "Dear Mr. Jones, I and several others amongst the protest group at Kirby Misperton," and he is a local person, "are aware that there are amongst us very, very few individuals who, in their behaviour towards the police, occasionally seem anxious to provoke confrontation. This," he says, "we deplore. Your officers should not feel encouraged by this to behave roughly towards protesters that they have to remove from in front of the gates. Some few do feel, although the majority act with commendable restraint. Will you exercise more care in removing protesters, particularly women, who, if they refuse to move aside, should be lifted carefully by 4 officers, not dragged by 2, their arms twisted, pressure applied to their arms and armpits, leaving them on 3 occasions I have witnessed in tears? Your officers cannot have felt they were threatened by these ladies in any way, and will concede that the atmosphere at the gates, and will you concede that the atmosphere at the gates is overwhelmingly peaceful?"
I suppose the issue for me is that there are various tactics that we need to deploy depending on the situation that we face, and we have an obligation to make sure that whatever level of force that we may have to use is proportionate to what we're actually facing. So, there are occasions where we've had to lift people out of the way. There are occasions where we've had to move people. And officers are trained to do this with the minimum impact on the individuals that they're dealing with. The issue for me is that I want that there's nobody getting hurt, be it police officers, protesters, employees of the company. We are trying to adopt a position which is around making sure that we talk to people, everybody has an understanding of what's going to happen next, and a reasonable approach around this is what's likely going to happen. We have a 5-stage process where we talk to the protesters around what's going to happen next. Only after that 5-stage protest, if they are still causing unreasonable behaviour, then we will take action.
We're going to break it there. We'll be back with the Chief Constable in a moment or two's time. Fracking and what's happening with Operation Kingfisher at KM8 at Kirby Misperton. Just to pursue this for a moment or two, you smile from ear to ear because I know you're into this issue. I'm sure you go to bed thinking about it and wake up thinking about it in the morning. What's happened now? Former police officer and best-selling author Mike Pannett, a name I'm sure you're familiar with, he's been at the fracking site this week, and he explained to the assembled media that he is concerned about the cost of all this operation.
I counted over 70 with a handful of non-violent protesters. But, the bigger picture is how strapped for cash North Yorkshire Police is worrying me. We'll look down in Sussex, it's over £4 million off the police budget. Lancashire into 7 figures. North Yorkshire, we're really struggling.
That's Mike Pannett speaking to the media on the protest line down at Kirby Misperton the other day. Chief Constable, what are the financial implications of what you're having to do at the moment?
I think one of the things that, and it's a reasonable thing for taxpayers in North Yorkshire to ask around kind of the financials around this particular operation. We have learnt from other areas, because obviously other areas, both Sussex and Lancashire, have had issues before, so we've built that into our planning to make sure we try and minimise the cost to the organisation. At the moment, it's well within our force budget. Clearly, at some point, if it continues or it escalates, then there are things that we can do with the government in relation to a special grant.
This is something that Julian Mulligan, the Police and Crime Commissioner, said on television the other day, that once the cost of policing any given operation, and in this case it would be policing the fracking protest, goes beyond, is it 1% of your budget, then something is triggered and central government will help you out.
Yeah, I mean, in my time in South Yorkshire, there were 3 such occasions where they got additional money from government when it kind of went over the 1% of your revenue budget. So for us, we're a long way away from that. But also you'd expect any organisation to have reserves that it can use depending on the set of circumstances. So, if we got a complex murder investigation, or if we got, God forbid, something that happened on the rail network, then we would have been in a position to obviously respond and utilise that reserve. At the moment, we're in a position where we've planned to minimise the amount of money this will be costing us, recognising that some of that will depend on how the operation goes on.
How much have you budgeted for?
Well, at the moment, we have a major incident reserve, which we will potentially utilise in the first instance. Again, we're nowhere near that. I think we have committed, and probably the Gold Commander no doubt will be annoyed when the Chief says these things on live radio.
It's all right, you're the head of the police force, you can say what you like.
We have committed to publish in due course the ongoing cost of the operation on probably a monthly basis, so that information will be available, quite rightly, because it's your money.
You just thought second time around about whether you actually name a figure this morning. Go on, how much is it?
No, there isn't a point in naming a figure, because at the moment we are working through, and that figure will be available on a monthly basis. So, we have a major incident reserve that we're nowhere near. So until such time as we get close, and people will be able to see that as we go along.
How tough is this in financial terms? Because, you and I, when you were last on the show in March, and at that time I think we spoke on that occasion about cutbacks to police budgets, about the difficulties that you face balancing the books, and now you've got this, albeit that you've got a major incident reserve, squirreled away, ready for this kind of thing. How difficult is this extra cost going to make balancing the books in North Yorkshire for you?
It doesn't help. I think one of the issues, and a colleague of mine, Sarah Thornton, who chairs the National Police Chiefs Council, has been on the radio and TV today talking about the increasing demand facing police services. And we are going to government saying that the settlement that we received last time isn't good enough. We do need to fund a police service that's finding itself dealing with both a security situation, a increasing demand thrown through the increase in 999 calls across the nation in the last period of time, and the complexity of what we're trying to manage. And this is the 7th year of austerity, and it's getting harder.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, we spent the first hour of the show this morning talking about schools asking parents for more money because they haven't got the budgets. Quite regularly we talk about the National Health Service struggling for cash and having to cut back on what they do or find new ways of doing it. Here you are, Chief Constable of North Yorkshire, telling us this morning that you are in exactly the same boat.
Well, I think anybody who operates at a senior level within the public services knows that things have been, really difficult and tight over the last period of time. So when colleagues in the NHS or education or we're all interdependent of each other. So if one's is shrinking, it has an impact on us. So surrounding forces who are having to cut back as well, they're not targeting and tackling organised criminals that may impact on North Yorkshire. So, we're all interdependent of each other, and I think it's time for us to really have a conversation with the public around what level of service we can afford.
Some are suggesting, of course, that, and it's something that you've touched on in a way, you made reference earlier on to policing football matches. Some are suggesting that what you are doing, what you're having to do with your duty as the police force at the moment, is to enable a commercial operation, Third Energy's fracking, to go ahead. Somehow that they should be helping to pay the cost in the same way that you would expect a football club to make a contribution or to pay for the policing of their event.
Yeah, I've heard that said. I think the issue is around, as soon as you get a commercial firm paying for policing, does that not then impugn our impartiality? I think the issue for us is as a public body that we have a responsibility to provide a policing service to businesses, communities and individuals in North Yorkshire. This just happens to have got to a situation where we're having to be present in order to keep people safe and having the ability to protest, quite rightly.
You've touched on this already, but just to be absolutely clear, as Chief Constable of the county, does what is going on at Kirkby Misperton at the moment threaten policing in the rest of North Yorkshire in any way? If you have all these resources deployed effectively down a country lane in Rydale, what's happening in Scarborough, York and Harrogate when somebody needs your help? How thinly is the Kirkby Misperton operation stretching you?
I think that's emotive language you're using there. I think
heaven forbid.
I think the issue for me is more around that we've planned for this operation. We've planned also around business as usual. I think the issue for me and the senior commanders is to make sure that business as usual isn't being impacted. And the various measures that we're looking at are at the moment suggesting that it isn't the case.
Dave with the cricket, Dave on the roads, and the Chief Constable of North Yorkshire, Dave Jones. At least I haven't had to remember many different names this morning. Final call this morning comes from Eddie, who is with us on the line. Good morning, Eddie.
Good morning.
Hi.
Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. Whereabouts are you? I think this is significant. I'm
at the gates of the KM8 fracking site with a lot of local people who are very confused, and we have a question for the Chief Constable. What is his personal definition of peaceful protest?
Hi, Eddie. Thanks for the call. It's not about my personal definition.
Well, I'm asking that. What is your personal definition?
Well, the definition that we are utilising is the fact that a peaceful protest is anything that does not cause serious damage, disorder or disruption, which would come from our gold strategy.
Do you understand that, Eddie?
Yesterday I was arrested for riding a bicycle. Where was a serious disruption in that?
Explain more about what happened. Paint us a picture.
I was cycling up the Great Hampton Road, about 100 metres in front of a lorry, which also had police officers walking in front of it. I was causing no obstruction. I subsequently came off the road, stood with my bike to watch the lorry go past, and I was arrested for obstruction of the highway, held in a police van for 3 hours, and then held in the cells until 8 o'clock at night.
Chief Constable.
You've got mail.
Well, I think one thing, peaceful protest is different from whether or not you've been in relation to the law, in relation to obstruction of the highway. I won't get into individual circumstances because I'm sure if you've got concerns around that, you'll want that looked into, and clearly we will look into it.
Eddie?
Do you remember the work of the suffragettes, of Gandhi and of Martin Luther King, who used direct action, non-violent direct action, to gain some of the civil liberties that we enjoy today? Those are our cultural heroes.
Yeah, go on. And the point you're making, just let's turn this into a question for the Chief this morning.
Well, I want to know what side he thinks history will judge him.
That's a fair enough question. How's history going to judge you?
I think history will judge me, hopefully like most other police officers who put themselves to protect the public. We took an oath to uphold people's rights, and that's what our determination will be to do, to uphold everybody's rights. Those rights, though, cannot influence and impact on other people in a way that is disproportionate and unlawful.
Eddie, do you feel that's how North Yorkshire Police are acting at the moment?
Absolutely not. The CPS guidelines to police officers, and there is High Court case law that states, along with our human rights, that protest can cause disruption. I mean, that's the point of protest. It's not standing on the side of the road waving a banner. We intend to cause disruption, and we have a right to cause some disruption. And North Yorkshire Police have openly stated yesterday that they will not facilitate that right.
This is where we go back to the point I made earlier on about certain conventions that do give people the right to protest, even if it causes disruption. Do you not accept that some of the actions that you're taking are denying people that right? I think that's the point that Eddie's making.
I think the point I'm trying to make is that there is a balance between everybody's rights here, and that the police service finds itself in the middle of this, and our role is to make sure that we balance that as best we can, that it's proportionate and justified. And I've spent most of my service trying to make sure that I protect people and they have the ability to carry out their rights. And I'm not sure whether or not me and Eddie will ever agree on some of this.
I think you're probably right, Eddie.
Why don't you come down the gate, Chief? Why don't you come down the gate and see for yourself? In Lancashire, they did. They sent the big boy down, and he was appalled what his police officers were doing.
Do you think you'd be appalled if you saw what your officers were doing at Kirby Misperton?
No, I don't.
There we are, Eddie. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for putting your question. Chief Constable, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Good to see you again. I hope to see you in 6 months' time, but maybe talk to you even earlier than that.